There's always some kind of over-the-top evil threatening the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but a serious legion of enemies might have been hiding in the shadows the whole time. We've seen aliens, robots, and literal gods in the MCU, but now that the Blade franchise is getting a reboot, we're getting vampires! And we are not talking about the sparkly Twilight kind. But what has our favorite Daywalker been doing the past few years? The blip was a big deal for many MCU characters, but it may have made his fight against vampires even more difficult. The original Blade movie starring Wesley Snipes came out all the way back in the year 1998. Yeah, it even predates movies like X-Men and Spider-Man. While we all loved Wesley Snipes as the Daywalker, the Blade reboot will feature Mahershala Ali stepping into the vampire hunter role. And just in case you're wondering, Wesley Snipes has given the okay to get hype about the new movie, even if he isn't going to be starring in it. Of course, this upcoming project isn't going to be an exact continuation of the old movies, and there aren't many details about what it will be about yet. But it never hurts to get a quick recap about what went on in the highly regarded original Blade franchise. Eric Brooks' pregnant mother was attacked by a vampire, which gave her special enzymes that were just enough to give him some sweet skills, but not enough for him to go full vampire. This kind of half-human, half-vampire is known as a dhampir, and Blade dedicates his life to taking out full-blooded vampires. In the first movie, a hematologist named Karen is attacked by a vampire and inadvertently meets Blade, who tells her to literally get out of town. Things are bad because a young vampire named Deacon Frost wants to start an all-out war with the humans, and Blade has to fight them while battling his own thirst with a serum that grows less effective the more he uses it. Karen manages to create a cure for vampirism, but the bad news is it won't work on hybrid creatures like Blade. Eventually, Blade finds out that his mother survived the night of his birth and that Frost was the one who bit her. But it's far from a happy family reunion, especially since Blade has to take her out along with the rest of Frost's minions. But ultimately, he's able to use Karen's medicine to destroy Frost, and then asks her to make him a new serum to help control his thirst. Pretty straightforward. Blade fights vampires, vampires lose. Get used to that trend because now we're at Blade 2. 2 years later, Blade is still hunting vampires when the Reaper virus hits the population, making the creatures immune to elimination by traditional means. Blade teams up with some less terrible vampires to trace the source of the virus and eliminate the Reapers, and he does. Hey, we've got a lot to get through here. In Blade Trinity, vampires resurrect the legendary Dracula, who rebrands himself as Drake, not to be confused with the singer-songwriter of Hotline Bling fame. He's such a big baddie that he's immune to sunlight, and Blade teams up with a fellow group of vampire hunters called the Night Stalkers to bring him down. They have a weapon called the Daystar, which destroys vampires, but they're afraid to deploy it because it might harm Blade. They eventually still do it, and while the film's ending kinda leaves some things open to interpretation, the Daystar activates, and the vampire population gets sparse. Blade is indisposed for a bit, and the Bloodsuckers' numbers pick back up. Namely, we're talking about the blip caused by Thanos during Infinity War. It got rid of half of all life in the universe, but are vampires really alive? We're not going to debate it on a philosophical level, but it's entirely possible that due to a vampiric loophole, the human population plummeted instantly, while the vampire population stayed the same. Especially if Blade was one of the people who got dusted. Sure, he's not completely human, but he's not a complete vampire either. We could definitely accept the magic rocks used by the purple giant alien might consider Blade to be alive by their definition. Even if the vampires did perish in the decimation along with everyone else, it would be a simple matter to bulk their numbers back up. It takes a long time to make a new adult human, but creating a new vampire is a whole lot quicker. And if that's the case, then MCU mortals would be in even more trouble when the decimation was undone during Endgame. Not only would the vampire population have likely increased after the event, but then all those missing vampires would suddenly show up again, and the sudden influx of vampires could spell disaster. Everybody knows vampires like to feed, and they hate sunlight, but the vampires in the Blade universe are frankly very cliquey. They form secret societies and alliances and manipulate humans as their familiars. With Blade out of the picture and the world in disarray after the decimation, it would have been a prime time for vampires to extend their influence and to bolster their ranks. After all, who would notice some extra missing humans after half the population was just blinked out of existence? Even if Blade did survive the decimation, his job would have gotten a lot more complicated in light of it, or in darkness of it. But if Blade was hard at work, why haven't our heroes encountered him yet? At the very least, you'd think Nick Fury would have rounded him up. Well, in the comics, Blade is taken out of commission quite a few times. In Night Stalkers, he ends up getting committed to a psychiatric hospital following a battle with Dracula. This takes him out of commission, but eventually he's released by Doctor Strange, who wants him to head up the Night Stalkers. And as we know, Doctor Strange is getting a sequel during Marvel's Phase 4. And Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is going to have the tone of a horror movie. Since the Blade movies are definitely darker than the average Marvel movie, it would make sense to touch on Blade's story at this point. Don't forget that Doctor Strange just returned after being dusted for 5 long years. He keeps tabs on what's going on in the world, and an increase in vampire population would definitely pique his interest. But he can't fight all the bad guys himself, so it's plausible he would have an interest in finding Blade and making sure he's back in the game. After all, if we were going to guess who knew about vampires this entire time, Doctor Strange would definitely be up there on our list, right next to Nick Fury, and maybe even Korg. The giant wooden fork would only be useful against a trio of vampires. Please don't tell me I'm the only one who wants to see Korg take down a triple vampire threat with a giant fork. That's going on my vision board. Oh, and did we mention that Nick Fury might know something about vampires in the MCU? Aliens might be his main focus right now, but we believe in his ability to multitask, and in the comics, Blade has spent some time in S.H.I.E.L.D. custody. It's possible S.H.I.E.L.D. would see an inhuman creature like Blade as a threat to be detained, but let's not ignore the possibility that he detained himself willingly. Blade hungers like a vampire, but he manages to keep his need to feed in check with the use of a special serum. If that serum runs out or becomes less effective, he's in big trouble, and so is pretty much everyone else around him. He could have decided to go to S.H.I.E.L.D. for help finding a solution to his problem and voluntarily surrendered to be kept in stasis or detained somehow. There was also a period of time when Blade was detained by his father, Lucas Cross. He brought Dracula back to life, which is definitely a good idea and could not have gone poorly. Then he kidnaps Blade with the intention of having him bite a girl and fulfill a prophecy. Adding something like this could potentially revamp Blade's origin story for the current MCU audience. Or maybe Blade has been working hard this whole time, but not in the infamous New York City. In addition to spending a lot of time in Detroit in the comics, he also joins the Vanguard, a secret Black Ops team of superheroes who pulls off covert missions on foreign soil. Since the Black Widow movie is going to be filled with spies and ignite our thirst for high-quality espionage, this might be another way for the Blade reboot to tie into what's currently going on in the MCU. Of course, there are pretty much an infinite number of ways for Blade to be introduced into the MCU, and to explain why he hasn't interacted with any of our other heroes. After all, while they're focused on taking out any threat to the planet from arms dealers to invading aliens, Blade is really focused on the whole taking down vampires thing. We know the Blade reboot is not going to be part of Marvel's Phase 4, and we've made our peace with that, reluctantly. But there are tons of great characters who could emerge as part of Phase 5 and beyond besides Blade. Sure, the stories of Phase 4 could help set things up for future characters, but so could Blade. Excuse us while we think pretty far ahead for a little bit. There was a period of time where it seemed like Blade would never get to join the MCU, but he's just one hero we never thought we'd see there. Spider-Man also managed to swing on over, even if his time there is precarious, and now Marvel Studios has the rights to use the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. And if we're going to be talking about introducing non-human creatures with special powers into the MCU, then we should definitely be talking about mutants, and one group of them in particular. That's right, we're talking about the Morlocks. There are plenty of mutants out there who look just like average humans, but there are also those who don't quite fit in. Many of them have physical mutations, and instead of risking exposing themselves to the general public, they prefer to stay hidden underground. At San Diego Comic-Con, when Marvel Studios head Kevin Feige was dropping hints about upcoming projects, he did say he didn't have time to talk about mutants, not the X-Men in particular. Could this have been an admittedly vague hint that some non-X-Men mutants would be showing up in the MCU? Since the Morlocks live underground, it's possible their subterranean universe could cross over with the vampires. And if you think about it, the MCU has been getting, if not friendlier to non-human creatures, at least increasingly aware of them. The Avengers showed the people of Earth a Chitauri invasion, and then we have aliens, cyborgs, and flying horses all in a giant battle during Avengers Endgame. Maybe the vampires stepping up their game in the aftermath of the decimation could mean the Morlocks could be convinced to slowly come out of hiding, for better or for worse. If you don't read the comics, it might surprise you to know that there's actually a lot of interactions between the X-Men and vampires. Jubilee even becomes a vampire for a period of time after being exposed to their enzymes and eventually bitten by Zarus, the son of Dracula. She also turns Wolverine, but don't worry, they get better. This may just be wishful thinking, but it could be that introducing darker elements to the MCU could be a slippery slope. First, you got Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness upping the weird and scary factor. Then comes Blade and vampires, followed by Morlocks, and finally the X-Men. Hey, it could happen. Even if all of that came true in the MCU, it still would barely touch on all of the crazy off-the-wall stuff that's happened in the history of Marvel Comics. This idea doesn't even involve any clones or zombies. Don't get us wrong, we're excited about having vampires in the MCU, but if they bring along mutants, it's all the better. What do you think Blade's been doing in the MCU all this time? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below, and then click on that subscribe button to get access to all of the latest videos from CBR. Bye for now.